Well, hello. Thought I'd post a quick video here tonight on tools. I haven't posted a video lately because I've been riding and working on bikes. And I got a couple private comments on some videos about some of the tools I use in the videos. And some of them I use religiously, some of them I pull them out on rare occasion. We all have tool sets. If we work on bikes and cars or heavy equipment, whatever, anything mechanical, you usually have your set of ratchets and wrenches and sockets and screwdrivers and all those sorts of things. But on occasion, you got to pull out some of those rare tools, those oddball tools that help you do some of the less common tasks. But here's a few I use. To begin, I'd like to talk a little bit about my power tools. I use these three tools all the time, not only working on bikes, but also working on cars. This particular tool is nothing more than a hex drive screwdriver with a quick release chuck. It has a varying torque clutch system and it's reversible, forward and backwards. Has two batteries that come with it, and it's made by Snap-on. And I've had this for about, oh my goodness, 4 or 5 years now. And it's worked flawlessly. I've never had a problem with it. They've since upgraded this model with a light and a little heavier chassis, but this thing's worked very nice. And if you've been around bike shops at all, you see this as being a very, very common tool. Typically, you'd also buy a set of elongated bits to go along with it. And for if you're working on BMWs, that's going to be primarily Torx. Next up is this. This is also made by Snap-on. This is a 1/4 inch battery powered ratchet or cordless ratchet. And I've had this one here for I think 2 years now. And it's a rheostatic type control. I'm not sure if that's a proper term, but however hard you push the button is how hard the head spins. So you can go slow to fast. I've used this one extensively. This is the latest model, and like I say, it came with 2 batteries. These are the new Monster lithium batteries, so they tend to last a lot longer than the old style bimetal type batteries. And last but not least, on my cordless set is this here unit here. This is a 3/8 drive impact, also from Snap-on. It came with 2 batteries, 2 Monster lithium batteries. It's actually a little heavier battery than this one. This one here is a 14 volt, whereas this big one here is an 18 volt. So it's got a little more power. It came with 2 batteries, and for all these tools, I can get through a day of working on a full work day of working on cars or bikes without the batteries dying. And they have great warranties behind them. They are a little pricey though. A cost-effective option for an impact wrench is something like this here. Now this is a corded plug-in impact wrench. I've had this for about a little over 10 years, I think. And it's never let me down, and I didn't pay a lot for it. And here in Canada, this is a Mastercraft, which is purchased at Canadian Tire. So it's not expensive. I think I paid $149 for it. Actually, I think I paid $89, and it was regularly $149. And I've used this a lot, primarily for things like axle bolts. Also, stuck sprocket bolts can be really difficult to get off, but this here sometimes can make short work of them. So this is a great option. Here are some extra long screwdrivers by Snap-on. I have a number 1 Phillips, a number 2 Phillips, and a number 2 slotted head. Snap-on, from my experience in the 30 some odd years I've been wielding tools, they tend to have the sharpest bits, sharpest head tips on their screwdrivers, and they tend to really get a hold of a fastener. Having long screwdrivers like this too allows you to get in, especially on motorcycles, some of those really, really tight areas. Everything on a motorcycle is so compressed down, so pressed down into small spaces that everything's tucked in and piled on top of the other. You have to make one of those little adjustments, or perhaps remove this tiny component that's buried deep under there. These things make short work of it. Now, Not every motorcycle, but most motorcycles have forks on the front. The vast majority do. And if you drive or ride a motorcycle for over a period of several years, the fork seals tend to wear out. You need a tool to help you get those fork seals out and put new fork seals back in. This particular set I bought, believe it or not, I bought off eBay, I think for $30-some. And what this allows you to do is a weighted system where you choose the size of fork you're working on, and there's several different collars here. You mate these two collars together, and they sit inside this weight system that allows you to pound down a seal into a fork around the slider. There's other far more expensive options to this tool. Motion Pro, who sells very competitively priced motorcycle tools, they sell individual seal drivers, and each one's about $50 here in Canada. So this is a very, very cost-effective measure to pounding fork seal driver. I've used this 6 or 7 times, and it hasn't failed me yet. It works brilliantly. In addition to a fork seal driver, and these ones are quite oily, you need what they call bullets. Now this bullet set I think I paid $8 or $9 for. All they are just simple, smooth plastic collars that sit over top of the fork when you're sliding the seal down onto the slider. What that prevents it from doing is there's machined grooves in the top of the fork. If you slide a rubber seal over top of that, those grooves will tend to tear that brand new seal you're putting on. These prevent that from happening. There is an even more cost-effective manner than this, and that is to just use duct tape. But for $8 or $9, this was money well spent for me. These are two tools offered by Motion Pro. This is a compression tester, and this is a leak down tester. The compression tester gives you a very quick view of the general health of an engine, of a cylinder in particular. The leak down tester gives you a much more in-depth view of the health of an engine. It's a little more involved. This tool's a little more expensive, but I prefer this over this. However, this is nice if you're out test driving a used motorcycle and want to quickly test the compression just to see where it's pushing. This is a good idea. Both these tools are handy to have. And like I say, they're both available from Motion Pro. This one here basically just tests what kind of pressure an engine can build up with the starter. And this particular tool allows you to pump up air into a cylinder, a motorcycle engine cylinder, and then measure how much of that air leaks out and at what rate. Okay? So this is a handy bit to have, and I've used both of them. If you've watched all my videos, you've seen both of these tools being used. I love Motion Pro. I find their motorcycle-specific tools very reasonably priced. This particular tool is a motorcycle chain breaker and chain riveting tool. It's not an expensive one. You can pay a lot of money for these tools. But this here does the trick for me. I use this probably 4 or 5 times a year, and it allows me to break a chain and to re-rivet it into place. It comes with everything you see here, and it's about $80, which is on the cheap side. You can buy very expensive versions of this tool. You don't have to use it just for final drive chains on motorcycles. You can also use it for cam chains and primary drive trains inside the engine. So this is really handy to have, especially if you're riding a sport bike. If you're working on forks, the other thing you're going to need is a set of tools, especially for cartridge forks, that allow you to disassemble the cartridge because it's under tension with the spring. And that can be an involved process without the right tools. A kit like this, as you see here, is probably in the $60 range, but well worth the money. You have a bleeder, which is basically does nothing more than grab a hold of the slider, and the cartridge allows you to pump that. You have a spacer compressing tool. You have a long hex drive unit that allows you to get to the plug underneath the bottom of the fork. And of course, an oil syringe here, which allows you to set the collar to the right height and put the right amount of oil inside the fork once you've done servicing it. And of course, a pressure retainer fork. So all these things, if you've watched all my videos, you've seen me use this here kit to disassemble a cartridge fork. It works very well, and I highly recommend it. Some of these tools you can make yourself, but you can save yourself a lot of headache and time just by spending the $50 or $60 and buying it from somebody like Motion Pro. And here are some measurement tools. A set of feeler gauges here. These have, years ago, these were expensive. Now you can buy them anywhere for next to nothing. I prefer these here kind with the tapered blades, so the blade actually gets a little narrower towards its end, allows you to get in a little tighter areas. And they range, these are metric, so they read up to 1 millimeter thick, and all the way down, I think, from 0.02 millimeters, so very small. You can get them in metric and English, and you can actually get conversion charts if you have one or the other. This is if you've been around spark plugs, this is a spark plug gapper. Strangely enough, I've never had a spark plug that wasn't gapped properly from the factory, but I have this and I double check everyone just in case. I have a metal ruler, which has helped specifically with some of the finer measurements I have to take on a motorcycle. It's worked very well. And last but not least is just a set of dial calipers here. Very handy to have when measuring things like valve shims, making sure you have the right size or not, or double checking the size that's stamped on the shim can be helpful. This one here can also measure the inside the space between two fixed objects, so that's reverse. And I think I spent $16 for this. If you're working on BMW motorcycles in particular, and late model BMW motorcycles, they're heavily controlled by computers these days, and sometimes you need to interface with that computer to reset service lights or service intervals. This is a GS911. It's a company that makes this interface. It's not made by BMW. It plugs directly into the bike. There's a receiver for this end of it, and this USB end plugs into your laptop. And with the supplied software, it allows you to view the status of the bike. If there's an error code coming up on your on your dash of your bike, this will tell you what's causing that error code and at least pinpoint the areas that you have to go work on. It also, like I mentioned, resets service intervals. If there's a service light up on your bike, this will reset it for you. Very, very handy. This particular model will not work with a K1600. There's an upgrade to this model called the GS911 Wi-Fi, and that's the one I have on order. I've used this one many times though, and I'll probably use the new Wi-Fi once those bikes become more common many times as well. This is a Gunson colortune set, and what this has are two small spark plugs that have glass housings in the collar. Inside there, you can see that dark circle deep inside is actually glass. What these allow you to do is plug them in like you would a normal spark plug, run your motorcycle, and by judging the color of the fire that each cylinder generates, it will tell you whether or not your bike is running rich or lean. Now, this isn't so much of an issue with fuel-injected motorcycles, but it can be a real challenge to tune without a dynamometer a carbureted motorcycle. And I still do work on carbureted motorcycles. I've used this a few times. There's some viewing ports that allow you to reach down deep inside, and they reflect back the light so you can see what light is sparking up. And it's really, really handy to have when you are working on a carbureted motorcycle. It gets you close to tuning. Actually, some guys have tuned perfectly with this set here. So I bought this a while back, probably 6 or 7 years ago, and I've probably used it 5 or 6 times. This here Gizmo is a carburetor synchronizer or a throttle body synchronizer. Essentially, each one of these glass tubes, if you look closely, has a metal rod. You can see them all dangling down there. Metal rod inside, and it's a sealed tube. And what you do is you hook up each one of these nipples to each one of the different cylinders, turn on the motorcycle, and you can measure how much each cylinder is drawing in vacuum, and then adjust the carburetors or throttle body so that they're all equal. Smooths out the motorcycle tremendously. In the old days, we used to use long tubes filled with mercury, which was quite dangerous actually for our health. But this new system with just the metal rods and the glass works beautifully. I've used this in one of my videos recently, and it's a handy bit to have. If you are doing more than one bike, you should get one. Now, I've set many motorcycle valves in my day, and there's nothing more frustrating than going to adjust a valve that uses shims, these new modern small shims, and not having a shim on hand. So I've gone ahead and bought, actually I've even more than this in my shop here, but I've gone ahead and bought a few sets of shims so that as I need them, I know they're here, all the different sizes. And I have at least 10 of each size, so the chances are of me running out of one particular size in the middle of a job are not likely. If you have a sport bike in particular, they tend to, especially new sport bikes when they're new, they tend to require a lot of valve adjustment, or frequent ones, or more recent ones do, I find. So it's nice to have a set like this. A set of two trays like this, I think cost me $65 on eBay. So well worth the money, especially if you have a sport bike. If you're driving a cruiser, it's not going to be an issue because your chances are you have hydraulically adjusted valves. You don't even use shims. But sport bikes, higher strung sport bikes, they eat these things up. There will be a point if you work on around motorcycles where you need to remove a wheel bearing, and they are hard to get out without a proper tool to do the job. Problem is, a lot of the bearing pullers and removers that fit in deep into those holes that are so narrow can be quite expensive. Well, I bought this here kit about 4 or 5 years ago because I had to pull out, and I can't remember how big it was, but I had to pull out a bearing that I wrestled with a conventional puller for several hours, and I just gave up. And I went online and found this tool. This is an ingenious tool. Essentially, there are, there's 7 common sized cylinders. In each cylinder, in the end of each cylinder is a slot that's cut, okay? So this is the large one, and this is the small one. Now where the slot is cut on each one of these cylinders, that is set to a specific size common metric bearing for a metric motorcycle, so anything Japanese or German, of course. So what you do is you take the cylinder, you put it into the wheel bearing, okay? So if this is your wheel, slide that into the wheel bearing that you want to remove. Then you take one of these 2 rods, whichever one fits, so this would be the small one, and you set the wheel on its side so the weight of the wheel is sitting down on this cylinder, and you gently slide this rod through the other side of the wheel so it goes into that slot, okay? And then gently tap on this with a hammer, and that spreads that slot so it locks into place and actually squeezes the inside of the bearing. Then you really pound on this with a hammer, and it takes this cylinder, gets pushed out the end and takes the bearing with it. And you wouldn't think it would work, but I've used this about 10 times and it works brilliantly. Now when you remove a bearing in this fashion, you ruin it, period. But that's the whole thing is when you're replacing a bearing, you know it's already been ruined by use. So this is a handy tool to have. This is a Pit Posse, and I think this cost me about $60 when I bought it. So it's a handy bit to have. Now with like any vehicle, most brake systems are hydraulically operated. And there comes a point where you have to replace, as part of normal servicing, you have to replace that fluid that those systems operate on. I bought a reverse fluid bleeder system. So essentially this here pump hooks up on the bleeder nipple at the slave cylinder end, whether it's a brake caliper or a hydraulic clutch slave cylinder. This plugs into that and actually squirts fluid back up the system to the master cylinder reservoir. And it makes the brake bleeding job, essentially, it's not entirely, but essentially a one-man job. So you can be there by yourself and you can actually do the work using this system. It grabs from a reservoir that you have down, which is this clean bottle. You put your fluid in there and then pump it into the system. I've used this so much, I've worn out some of the pieces here, but it's very, very, very handy to have. Now, the last tool I want to mention is not a tool at all, actually. It's a set, it's an electrical set. Anytime you start working on a motorcycle, either adding accessories, restoring a motorcycle, or even a car for that matter, I've found that so many problems crop up when you don't get good electrical connections at the junctions. So what I went out ahead and did, and I think I got this off eBay for it, it was about $200. And it's basically a complete set for making your own plug terminals. Okay, and these are the sealed Bosch style. So they have a rubber gasket around here, this green thing here. And then essentially these are the very similar systems that are similar types of plugs that BMW uses in the factory. And there's basically different sized terminals that get clipped in. It comes with this tool that does most of the work for you. It's a ratcheting tool. It allows you to crimp down equally to put the plug in, and there's also a pin tool here to remove terminals that you either didn't intend to use or you need to take apart. So it all comes with this, and even an instruction manual. So this is very handy if you want waterproof plugs on your motorcycle or car. This is a great kit to have, and it'll take you a long time to go through it all. What you can do is as you use a particular type of plug, maybe you use all that plug up, you can just order 10 or 15 of those as opposed to a whole new kit. Very, very handy. So as you can see, I'm one of these guys that I buy a tool and I tend to keep it. I very rarely sell a tool. So as my kit continues to grow, I'm able to deal with more and more types of situations I run across. I love working on these things and cars, and I always find the right tool for the right job makes for the right mood. Anyway, until next time.